Hello, my beautiful watchers, and I thought I'm just going to show you how I like to make my maps. So if you follow me on Instagram, or if you follow me on ArtStation or DeviantArt, you would have probably seen me making a few maps. Now, I like to start quite big, 5,000 by 3,000, 300 pixels per inch in terms of detail quality. I do like to name my map, so we're going to call this map because I'm original, and I really like this color, so I'm going to save this color. Boop, boop, boop. There's my color. It was a watercolor I quite liked, but we're going to stick to our plan of selecting a nice 50% gray. Now this 50% gray is going to be our background, and I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm actually going to call this 50 gray and keep it over there. Now what I want to do is that I'm actually going to create 3 folders. We're going to call the top one land, I'm going to call this ocean, and I'm going to call this save. Now my save file is actually where I keep all of the things that I tend to work destructively, mostly just to keep my files a smaller size. But sometimes you just really need to keep some things, and having your little save folder is just a useful place to keep the important stuff. Now, one of the important things that you need to keep is going to be your height map. So let's start by creating our height map. I'm going to create a new layer, fill it with gray again. Gray is a good place to start if you want to create height maps and things like that. Starting with a neutral gray to create other things on top of is going to allow you to get more depth and more richness out of your, if you're doing digital painting, if you're doing more effects-based stuff like I'm doing over here. But having a nice neutral gray is a good place to start. I'm going to go render, and I'm going to go difference clouds, and I'm going to apply this a few times until I get something that I quite like. What I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to apply a difference clouds effect over that again. Now the reason I do this is because I find that having one difference clouds, you're going to get weird artifacts and stuff like that. And a good way to get rid of that is by having 2 different layers that are overlaid one on top of each other over your neutral gray. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select one, I'm going to go overlay, I'm going to select another, and I'm going to go overlay. Now you can already see that what it's done is it's knocked out a lot of those weird artifacts, but this is quite stark. So what I do is I set these to about a 50% opacity each, and what that does is, boop, if it'll allow me, it gives you a nice height map that looks slightly more natural. I'm actually going to knock these down to about, oh, there we go. That's probably why it was looking so strange. Let's go back to 50%. 50%. There we go. That looks, what this also does is that it means that the most dark regions of your map aren't black, and your most bright regions of your map aren't white. The reason for this is that when you start adding effects, you want a subtlety to it, otherwise it's going to look strange. It'll have a metallic quality to it that you don't necessarily want. Having your darkest darks grey and your lightest lights also grey, but a lighter grey, means that you get your textures without it clipping out of the extremes. Once it hits white, it can't go higher than that. Once it hits black, it can't go lower than that. So you want to keep your map, in a reasonable distance between. There's still quite a bit of artifacting here. Do you know what? Let's go with it. It always gives your map a little bit of interest. I'm going to crush those 3 layers together. I use Control E, select your layers so let's do that again. Select the layers that you want, Control E, smushes your layers together. You want to copy a layer, hold Alt, drag, creates a new layer. So I think the next thing that we need to do is actually decide where the continent's actually going to be on this. And I think a good place to start is to create a threshold. So we're going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Threshold. And what this does is it allows you to paint with, I want to use a soft brush here. And using white and black, so obviously there's your threshold layer on top of your height map. And what you want to do is that wherever you want there to be land, not that harshly, you're going to set your opacity a little bit lower than that, say to about 10%, and you can paint in where you want land. Let's create a nice little circular continent and push X to swap your colors. You can paint out where you just want ocean. I'm using a mouse here. I'm not using my Wacom tablet. You can use a Wacom tablet if you want to, but I'm lazy, and if that's ever a good reason for anything. I keep going back to make sure that I don't knock the darkest parts of my map too low and the brightest parts of my map too high. But now what I want to do here is that I want to create a land mass that's not too rough and not too smooth. And this does take a little bit of finessing. Oh, wrong one. Always push Charl, push the right buttons. It does take a little bit of finessing to get it right. Now obviously you can create as many land masses as you want to. Let's say you want to create another land mass there. You can do that. But keep on painting backwards and forwards, and what this will do is it'll give you some nice coastlines that are nice and ragged. Now you may think that these are incredibly rough, but don't worry, we're going to smooth these out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate. Oh, wrong one. Boop. So basically there's the total, the original height map that we were working with. It's a good thing to keep. Here is our height map where our continents are poking through the ocean. And what our threshold here is doing is it's showing us where's the water level rising to. If you double click on here, and here it'll tell you where all of your information is. You'll see I don't have anything in the darkest regions, nothing in the lightest regions, because if you do, it'll just blow it right out of the water. Excuse the pun. But yes, I like to keep it at about the middle section, but where you have your threshold set to is going to be where your water level reaches on top of your height map. These are all important things to keep, so I'm going to keep that layer and I'm going to crush that layer. So what I've got is basically the outline of what my continent will look like. This is a bit rough though, so let's refine that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select a color range. I'm going to select white, and that's going to give me an outline of my map. Now it's a bit rough, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go select, modify, and I'm going to expand it. I'm going to expand it by about 3 pixels. So what that's going to do is it's going to make sure that no island is smaller than 3 pixels. I'm going to use a nice harsh white brush, set your opacity to full, keep my brush nice, and there we go. And I'm just going to fill that in. I can't remember what the shortcut is to fill, but yes, I'm just going to fill in my entire selection. So what I did was I expanded my selection so that no island is smaller than that 3 pixel threshold that I set. It makes things look a little bit blobby at first, but trust the process. Basically, so again, what this does is this gives you a very good idea. Let's go here again, select, color range, white. And what this does is it gives you a very good indication of where your land is going to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, right, that's my land. So let's just pick a color for now. And I have my land, and I'm going to pop that into my land folder. I'm going to make land invisible for the time being. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to go just above ocean. You know what? I'm just going to duplicate land and pop it on top of ocean. You can do the same thing by clicking on a folder, holding Alt, dragging, creates a new folder. I'm going to call this my ocean shelf. And this is going to be underneath my land. And what I want to do is I'm going to paint that. Okay, let's go select, modify, expand, and let's choose 50. Let's choose a different color. Now remember, nothing is set yet. That would be my ocean shelf. So what the land is sitting on. Now obviously color, we haven't decided on anything yet. I don't like how blobby everything, especially the ocean shelf is, but we're going to fix that once we get to it. Let's make these invisible, and let's concentrate on our ocean floor. We're going to take our height map and we're going to drag that into our ocean, and let's make our ocean blue. Do you remember I said I quite liked that color blue that I saw from earlier? We are now going to fill our ocean with that color. I have a color layer. I'm going to set that to overlay, and I'm going to pop that over our ocean. Now this is rather extreme. Now this is obviously a matter of taste. You might like the extremeness of the deep dark and the incredible bright. Now obviously this is all going to be covered with land, so you're not going to see all of these white spots. But I like to mute that by just popping a gray underneath this layer, setting it to overlay as well, and bringing that opacity down a little bit, so that you've still got that feeling of topology without it washing out all of your details. Another thing that I think we should do before we go any further is that we should give this some definition, some embossing, some 3D. I want to go back to my height map, and I want to give it a little bit of definition. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Filter, Render, Lighting Effects. So in your lighting effects, you're going to get these lights, right? Now what you can do is that you can create 5 of these lights. And they're going to be a bit bright, but we can set that brightness down. I like to set my intensity to about 5. We can change things as we go along. We set our texture to green, which is going to use our green color channel to pick out where the height is going to be. Actually, let's set our intensity to about 9. That's going to give us some nice height definition. I like to keep my metallic quite high. I like to keep my ambience at about, let's set that to about 3, and our gloss to as little as we can set it. Let's go OK. Now what I've done here is, what I need to do is I need to go back here and bring a copy of that back, so that what I've got is my original height map as well as my height map without the effect. I like to keep both. So with that effect there, we can pop that into our ocean. Give our ocean some 3-dimensionality. Same thing, set this to overlay, set this to about 50%, and now we have some lovely valleys and mountains inside of our ocean. The next thing that I want to do is I want to concentrate on this ocean shelf that we created earlier. Now, I'm not 100% sure I like this ocean shelf. You can see it's very blobby. You've got some 45-degree angles, which happens from the mathematical expansion that happens. But I don't like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to select that. Let's create an empty layer on top of that, right? And in our empty layer, we want to feather that selection. I'm going to feather it by about 25 pixels. So what that does is it gives us a nice ocean shelf that is not so harsh. Again, the color doesn't matter. We're just using, let's fix that right now. Let's go to color, adjustments, hue and saturation. Let's colorize it for the sake of conversation. There we go. There's a nice ocean shelf color for us. And that is what our land is going to sit on top of. So now that we've got our continental shelf, what I want to do is I actually want to set and emboss. Now what I've got here is an inner bevel chisel soft, and it's quite low. I keep it to about 62%. I keep the size relatively low, and you're going to have to play around here to see what looks good to your eye. This is basically where you're going to have your shallow waters that fall off into your deep waters, and I quite like that. Let me just make this brush smaller. I quite like that. So what your land is going to sit on top of that, it's still a little bit too... So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take quite a soft brush, and I'm going to tease out some air. Ooh, wrong color. There we go, better color. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tease out some of these coastlines so that your land sticks, your continental shelf sticks out from underneath your continent. You don't want your continent drifting, otherwise it looks like it's sitting on nothing. This is quite a big continental shelf here. I'm going to play around with these emboss settings until I get a size that I like. Now obviously this is going to be to your taste, but again, if you've followed the Atlas map creation tutorial, this is going to be familiar territory for you. I haven't invented any of these techniques. I've just explored and found settings that I like for my maps. For individual islands, I do like to color around them. There we go. That looks better. There we go. It's a bit too round for my taste, but this is going to have to do for this tutorial. Now what I'm going to do is that, as I said, this is quite severe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here. Let's give it a little bit of a contour. And I'm going to drag this down like that. So it gives that falling off shape. That's a good idea. So what I'm going to do is that this is quite a harsh continental shelf. It almost looks like it's sticking out of the ocean. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop my fill just a little bit. So what happens is that the effect of Photoshop remains while the color of the layer itself is diminished. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to take my opacity and drop that a bit as well. So what happens is that it sinks under the water and you still get that. Now it's a bit smooth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and take my height map. You remember this one? And I'm going to overlay that on top of my continental shelf. But what I'm going to do, Control-Shift-G, and what that does, it clips it so it just colors the continental shelf, gives it a little bit more roughness. Again, merge the two layers together and you have a lovely continental shelf for your continent to sit on. Now obviously you can go and roughen this up and make it smoother, but I quite like that effect for now for this tutorial. I would obviously spend hours obsessing over coastlines, but for the sake of this tutorial, keeping it brief, this is how I would do my continental shelf. Right, let's pop some land on top of that continental shelf. Same story as before, I'm going to take my height map, pop it on top, and I'm going to Control Alt G, clip it to my land, and I'm going to set it to overlay. And this is an incredibly harsh green. We don't want our continent to be that green. Maybe you do, maybe you've got a jungle continent, but for me, I like my continent to be brighter than the ocean that it's sitting in, so I'm going to take the color of my continent, I'm going to go Image, Adjustments, Hue and Saturation, and I'm going to bump up the lightness a little bit. Now what you can do is you can create another layer on top of that. Now if you've got a layer clipped over your layer and you create another layer in between, it's going to automatically clip whatever layer you create to your main layer. Like my land layer had my height map clipped to it. Creating another layer on top of that automatically clips that layer to that layer. So what that means is if I take a color and I draw on a clipped layer, it'll only appear where the layer has been clipped and not outside of it. So what I can do is I can take the color that I was working with and I can gently start teasing in different colors over my map. Let's say we want to create more of a desert vibe around, say, here. Let's say this side needs a little bit more desert there. Let's say we've got more savanna grasslands over here. Oh, that's way too... No. There we go. Not quite savanna, but you get the point. Let's desaturate that. When in doubt, desaturate. Leaves never look as green as you think they are. There we go. And let's get a slight blue. Ooh. Blue works for swamps, so let's go swampy layers. Again, too saturated. There we go. Just click randomly. Sometimes just clicking randomly does just as good of a job, if anything else doesn't work. There we go. Let's say this is our continent. Yes, I'm quite happy with that. So I'm going to clip those together. And here we have our continent with mountains and everything on top of it. Let's say you're not happy with the detail of the mountains. You can take your layer again with your mountains and you can reclip it over it to an overlay. And what that does is it'll enrich your height map. What you can also do is that you can unclip that and you can overlay it over your entire image, drop the opacity, and it will also enrich that overlay. It's a bit extreme in this case, so let's just stick to clipping it to our land, giving it a nice rich color. Right, so we've created our continent and it's a bit bright. Let's dull it down a bit. How we're going to do that is we're going to create a gray layer. When in doubt, fill it with gray. Let's create a nice gray layer and set it to about 50%. What that does is it lowers your values in such a way that your whitest whites on your map don't blow out any possible snow that you want to put back onto this layer. So let's say I want to put snow onto the mountains. You know, here it'll actually still look like snow because you haven't washed out the... Actually, let's do that next. Let's create some snow. So in order to create snow, let's grab our original layer over here, this one. So I'm using the layer before we applied any embossing to it, because I just want to extract the information of the whitest whites from this. And in order to do that, again, we do our threshold map. And we want our snow. That's nice. Snowy texture right there. And we're going to... I like to click off of it, because for some reason when you select... let me actually show you. If you've got your threshold selected and you go select color range, it disables it. But if you click off of the effect, you go select color range, select your white, then it's happy. Don't know why that happens. I create a new layer, I fill it with white. I can't remember the shortcut for fill with white, but there is some key shortcut to do it. If you remember what it is, please put it in the comments. I'm going to delete my threshold because I don't need it anymore. And I'm going to delete that because I don't need it anymore. What am I doing, Charl? So what we've got here is snow on our mountains. But the snow is very flat. Now what I'm going to do is, do you remember our 3D layer? I'm going to bring that on top of our snow, clip it to the snow. I'm going to overlay it. I'm not going to overlay it. What am I going to do? I'm going to multiply. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower multiply so that our snow isn't completely washed out. Now you're going to want to play around with what colors you like here. The size of your snow, I'm keeping it rather minimalistic here. But basically this is how I create my maps. Now, one thing that I do like to do, okay, let's say we're happy with this now. I'm happy with the way that my land looks. What I do is I'm going to crush my land into a single layer. I'm going to crush my ocean into a single layer. I'm going to crush my ocean shelf and my ocean layer. And I'm going to call that ocean again, just so that everything stays nice and small. I'm going to take my land and I'm going to take my ocean. I'm going to group them together and I'm going to save them in my invisible save folder. Then what I'm going to do is that now I'm going to say, okay, let's start looking at the land itself. Something that helps is to add a small outline. It doesn't look natural, but it fixes the way our eyes looks at the map. It's literally a 1-point stroke, maybe a 2-point stroke. I like to add it in the center so that it doesn't straddle over nearly invisible pixels. And what I like to do is I like to drop the opacity to about 50%. Nothing harsh, just give it a little bit of a stroke. This one looks terrible. Let's fix that. A good way to fix that is to give the stroke a bit of color. We're going to give it a nice dark green, and we're going to bump up that opacity. Maybe make it a much darker green. Maybe even make it a little bit thinner. And that looks a little bit better. What that does is just gives your continents a little bit more it gives your continents a little bit more definition. It's very subtle, but it helps. Another thing that I like to do is I like to give it a little bit of an outer glow, just to distinguish your ocean from your continent again. Now I'm going to stick to a nice blue, and I'm going to make it quite soft. I do like to go to precise. It makes it bigger, but what it does is that it makes sure that every part of the land is glowing and not just the average. If you click it to softer, it's going to take a bit of an average around. Again, you might prefer it. In this case, strangely, I find that the softer look looks better in this case. but I'm also going to drop this opacity to about 40%, and that actually looks good. So this is without our outline and our glow, and this is with our outline and glow. You're going to want to play with the extremity of these settings. I think that's a good place to stop for now. If you want to add cities, I would do exactly the same thing again. Let's say, okay, I'm going to collapse this group, and I would create another group again, and I would call this cities, and I would create all of my cities inside of this information. Honestly, you can draw pictures and things like that, but I find that a good dot does a lot of hard work. Let me do that. If I actually create a layer to draw on, we're going to get somewhere. Pop that inside cities. Boop. So let's create a few cities. We're going to say there's a city there, there's a city there, there's a city there. For some unknown reason, they have a city in the middle of nowhere. And then what you want to do is that you want to outline those cities as well. Give them a nice stroke. 2 is good. And what you also want to do is that you want to give them a shadow. You want to be very aware of your global light. And I would set, if you're playing around in Photoshop, this is just a general rule, keep your global lights coming from the same directions. Like, don't, change that and have your lights coming from different directions. It's going to look better in all instances if your lights are agreeing with each other. What happens is that your the person looking at your map is going to believe it more if all of your light sources seem to be in correspondence with each other. For your cities, keep it very simple. Very slight shadow underneath it. When you do your text and stuff like that, I like using my Liberation. Where is it? Liberation Baskerville is my favorite font. Let's go London bold. Oh, that's very big. And pop that on top. And what you want to do is you want to treat your city names in the same way that you treat your city dots. So I like to go with a nice bright color, and I will give them, actually I'm also rather silly. Instead of applying a single filter to each individual element, it's often better to strip all of your elements, and everything that you want to have that filter, apply it to the whole group. That way, if your computer is struggling, your computer's not going to have to apply to every single thing. It's just going to apply it once to the entire group, and it'll allow you to edit things faster. Yes, I do exactly the same thing with roads. If I'm going to add a road, it's going to be quite a small thing, a 5 pixel. This is usually where I will now take my stylus, and now this is where it's interesting. You'll notice that because I have this layer in the group where the layer is being applied with the same color, it doesn't distinguish. If you do want a different effect applied, you're going to have to pull it out of the group. In this case, I want my roads to be under everything, and they will have their own effects, preferably not yellow. For my roads, I do bevel them, but I do flip the direction from up to down, so it looks like they dipped into your map. However, I also do keep them very light, and perhaps maybe a bit red. Again, depending on the style that you're going for, if you want a more futuristic look, I would go with grey. Obviously, greyer roads for asphalt and that sort of thing. The older it is, the brighter they're actually going to be, because you'll wind up with chalky roads or gravelly roads and things like that. Another thing that also helps to sell roads is adding a little bit of contour and texture. A little bit of texture goes a very long way in your bevels to sell them. It doesn't have to be extreme, maybe a little bit better than that. Scale it down to about 50. I find 50 works quite well. And unfortunately, your texture is going to depend on how severe your depth and your size settings are. So the deeper that is, the more severe the texture is going to appear. But again, this is going to be a case of your taste. I hope that helped. It's a bit of a slapdash explanation of how I go about my maps. I really don't like this continental shelf. I would really go into a lot more effort to make the continental shelf look more natural, as if it's flowing with the contours of the of your continent. But again, it is all down to your stylistic choices. I am rambling, and I'm going to stop recording now.